The views and content expressed on the Pop Culture Courtroom are provided solely for educational and entertainment purposes and do not constitute legal advice. For any legal matters, please consult with a licensed attorney.
Welcome back to the Pop Culture Courtroom. I'm Michael Kilgore.
And I'm William Mayfield. And today we're going to be shaking things up and talking about 2 episodes of 2 different legal shows. The first will be Suits, which caught a ton of popularity in its second go-around on Netflix. And the second will be the new Matlock starring Kathy Bates. And in analyzing these 2 shows, we're going to talk about the process of becoming an attorney and at some points how arduous and difficult, but yet rewarding it can be. We're going to start off talking today about Suits. And the premise of this show is that a very successful multi-practice attorney, Harvey Specter, is a big city New York attorney and a partner at Pearson Hardin. And he is looking for a new associate.
Yeah, so he interviews several boring gray suit Harvard law students and feeling very uninspired until in runs Mike Ross, who is trying to get away from undercover feds.
Yeah, he's part of basically a busted up drug deal here, and he's trying to get away, and he essentially stumbles into an interview room, which starts what will become a theme of today's podcast, a series of very unlikely events.
And fraud all over the place. So Mike interviews with Harvey. He's actually very honest with Harvey that he's not a real attorney, right, in that interview?
Well, yeah, he's not trying to get the job. He's literally just trying to avoid feds at the time, so he's just sitting there trying to wait. Harvey does things to the beat of his own drum. He is a really successful attorney. At Pearson Hardin, they call him the closer because he's the best closer in New York. But he has a little bit of an authority issue, and he likes to do things differently. And there's a rule at Pearson Hardin that you have to hire a Harvard associate. And so I think Mike's a bit of what appealed to him about Mike was that he was different. And so they start this, instead of just hiring a Harvard associate like he was asked to do, he kind of falls in love with Mike and his intricacies and starts this whole process of bringing on Mike as an associate attorney. The problem is that not only did Mike not go to Harvard, he didn't go to any law school. He's not an attorney at all. And that is really the premise of the first 5 seasons of the show.
And so I guess the question becomes, is what Mike did realistic? Is that something that you could actually pull off in real life?
So let's do this in kind of a unique way. We'll do a little bit of a pros and cons list here.
Okay.
Spoiler alert, the answer is no. But I'm gonna start the other way because as lawyers we don't always get the set of facts that we want. So
Right.
I'm gonna try to say the pros. Well, Mike has a famously photographic memory. It's like a diagnosed photographic memory. A lot of people like to say they have one. Some people say I have one about Tennessee football. But I
Absolutely. Well, Tennessee.
but Mike has a diagnosed photographic memory. He was studying to become a lawyer. In fact, in undergrad, he took a bar exam on a dare and passed it, which that is maybe the most unrealistic thing we're going to talk about. I don't care how smart you are, you simply haven't learned what you need to learn at that point to pass a bar exam. But he got in trouble, and that is the reason that he didn't end up applying for law schools. But he has all this knowledge and all this intelligence. So he's been taking the LSAT, which is the law school
Admissions
test. Basically, like it's like a standardized test. He's been taking those for people, and in the first 10 minutes of the show, he's incognito taking a LSAT exam, and the proctor of the exam notices him and tries to separate that exam. He quickly mixes that exam with all the others, making it to where that proctor's not going to be able to tell which one was falsely taken, and then runs out in disguise, and we see him making a deal with this guy who was trying to get into law school, who presumably he was taking the LSAT for. So there is knowledge and there is a decent backstory as to how Mike could possibly be effective.
Well, yeah, and part of the question here is, can you be a good lawyer with just a photographic memory? Because that definitely will help you learn the black letter of the law. But what law school tries to accomplish with its students is the ability to analyze facts, to apply the law to facts and come out with the right outcome. And so while Mike gets part of the way there with his photographic memory, he knows the law. He doesn't have any experience in applying that law to facts.
So I know you've heard this because you went to law school, and I've heard it a million times too. Law school is there to teach you to think like a lawyer.
Right.
I remember when I was in law school, I would constantly have people being like, "Well, what's the law on this or what's the law on that?" And I think law school is a lot different than people think. We don't sit down from day one and they say, "All right, open your law book. Here's law number 1, here's law number 2, here's law number 3, start memorizing." In fact, when I was in law school, almost all of my exams were open book,
Mhm.
which was a bit of a shell shock when we had to take the bar exam and it was 0% open book. And I have some questions about how good a training that is, but that's a podcast for another day. What I will say is that, and if we're sticking with the pros for now, because I actually have more cons, but if we're sticking with the pros, Mike, he's not just some guy who can memorize things with no other skills whatsoever. I mean, he thinks well on his feet. He's creative. He's practical.
Mhm.
And I've seen the entire series. He does really well in these situations. I think the bigger issue is how could you pull this off as a whole? I do think that, particularly with good training, I mean, I can tell you between internships and externships, probably I learned more from those probably than I did my classes at times. So I think with good training, you could become a lawyer without going to law school. But the bigger issue is all of the hangups and regulations, and I just think this is too big of a heist to realistically be pulled off, especially in an arena that is so big as New York corporate law.
He's got the intelligence for it, but what he doesn't have is the vetting that every state bar puts their attorneys through before they will issue them a license. And he could honestly, he could probably get by without a license for a while because judges don't ask you for your bar card when you come in front of them. But if an issue ever came up where it had to be looked into, they would discover that he didn't have a license.
That's true. Now on almost all of my pleadings, I do put my bar card or my bar number.
You put your bar number, but he could put a bar number. And, I really doubt that any judge would look them up on the bar website and make sure their number is accurate.
Mine's at 0356638. In case anybody out there thinks that this is some podcast facade to try to get away with the same thing myself. But that's another thing is you could, and I unfortunately remember this because I wanted to know which one passing the bar is a monumental step in any lawyer's life. It's the most relief. I've taken 2 bar exams. I was fortunate enough to pass both of them, and I would say the most relief I've ever felt in my life was when I got those results back.
Yeah.
And I wanted to congratulate my friends that also passed, and so there's state bar websites where you can look up who's a licensed attorney and who isn't. Now, they go into a little bit more detail as the episodes go on about the effort that the firm makes in this facade. So
Mm.
Harvey, the partner, is aware of this, and then the head of the firm, Jessica Pearson, ends up becoming aware of it. She's not okay with it, but through a series of events, her best option becomes to go with it, because essentially once she heard about it and didn't report it initially, she could actually get in trouble herself. So it ends up being this facade that Mike and Harvey and Jessica are all working on together. So some of these problems they work on together. A big one is trying to prove that he went to Harvard. There's an attorney at the firm named Lewis Litt who's not a big fan of Mike's, who becomes skeptical that Mike didn't go to Harvard because he didn't know about certain traditions that Lewis talked about. And that to me is one of the lesser difficult parts of this, but that becomes one of the ways that Mike's story starts to unravel, is when Lewis really digs into his Harvard education. But there's a lot more that they would have to do to actually get away with this.
Yeah, Harvard would be one of the more difficult alma maters to pull off because there is so much culture that goes along with going to Harvard. I remember in the pilot episode, Harvey flies him up there to take the tour of the law school to learn about the history of the school, and he gets into some trouble up there too. So he does try to learn some about Harvard, but apparently he's not very convincing.
And that just goes to show how unrealistic the whole plot line is. And it's great. It's very interesting. A lot of people argue that the show really loses a step once this, and this is a bit of a spoiler, so stop listening if you haven't seen it and you want to watch. But once this gets uncovered, and that's no longer at the center of the show, a lot of people argue that it becomes less interesting. So
Hmm.
I understand why they're doing this, but at the end of the day, Harvey is a really busy guy. It's simply not worth his time to go through all of this to make sure that some guy he's never met before can be his associate, despite the fact that it's literally against the law, and that ends up coming to fruition. It's not simply fraud against the New York State bar, but because of the things he ends up doing, it becomes an unlicensed practice of law, and gets into something that is actually against the law. And for someone who had so much to lose, I mean, Harvey was a really successful attorney and had worked really hard to get where he was. It's just not a realistic risk that someone would have taken.
So what I'm hearing are that the pros are that Mike has the intelligence to be a good attorney, but the cons is that everything else is working against him. You got to convince too many people.
I would say that's fair. I think what appealed to Harvey about Mike was that Harvey had an enormous amount of faith in his own skills, and he was looking for someone to mold. And because Mike had this level of intelligence and ability to remember things and this skill that even Harvey didn't have. I mean, Harvey can't tell you what was on the 147th page of a book that he
Yeah.
read. That's something that only someone with a photographic memory can do. The two things that Mike really brought is A, he was probably the most moldable of anyone. B, he actually brought a skill that Harvey didn't have. The question is not, to me, is Mike the best fit as a associate attorney for Harvey? It's, would this ever happen? And because of how much trouble this could cause, because of the difficulties of pulling it off and everything that you would have to show, and basically, probably have to create like a fake LinkedIn and a fake uh, bar account and try to and a fake history of him going to Harvard. It's all just the reward was not there. I mean, this keep in mind that the reward is simply having a really good associate attorney, which can be really valuable, but it's not worth all of this.
So, William, do you think Mike Ross or anybody could actually be a good attorney without going to law school?
It's possible, but it's impractical. It's something that they raise, or that not the show, but that people online have raised as an issue in this show is, why didn't Mike just find any law school that he could get into? They talked about the issues with him getting in trouble and things of that nature, but he probably could have found some law school somewhere that would accept him, because he's going to have this through the roof LSAT score. He says in the first episode that he would have made a 180 for a guy. The guy he was taking it for, he had to tone down the test and intentionally miss some because the 180 would have made it obvious that guy is cheating.
Yeah.
Regardless of how much trouble he'd been in, if he goes and gets a 180 on the LSAT, he's going to get into some law school somewhere. And then at that point, he can go through it the right way and try to apply based on his merit, and not have to go through this route. While there are many classes in law school that attorneys don't end up using a whole lot, simply because when you're in law school, you don't know which area you're going to practice. I didn't know which area I was going to practice. So you take a lot of different classes, and some of them end up being really, really relevant, and some of them end up being not as relevant. But particularly the first year classes and those subjects that end up being on the bar exam, those are really fundamental to the practice of law.
Yeah.
And you learn them at a slower pace. When we're taking them for a semester, you take it for 3 months, and some of them, like, has contracts too, which you take the second semester. Civil procedure has civil procedure too, which torts too, second semester. So you're learning all these subjects over a year. Well, when you take them for the bar exam, you spend 3-4 days on them.
Yeah.
So my point being is that when you first learn these subjects, you're learning them for a year and you're learning them slowly and you're learning them deliberately and you're really learning what they mean. And in a lot of situations, you're reading cases to learn how these laws came into effect. I just think that it would be very difficult to replace that by simply reading and memorizing because, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, you're not learning to think like a lawyer. Now,
Right.
in this specific unique situation, he's learning from a great attorney. We have someone who had very specific aspirations of going to law school, who started in undergrad trying to become a lawyer. So if it could work in any situation, this probably is the most likely situation. But it's just one of those things where there's two. Almost anybody that wants to do this is just going to apply to and go to law school. So I don't know if we're ever going to really figure out the answer to this question. Interestingly enough, it used to be that you had to go to law school to even sit for the bar exam. There are now 4 states where you could become an attorney and sit for the bar exam without going to law school at all. And that's California, Vermont, Virginia, and Washington. Again, as we talked about, I think it would be incredibly difficult to pass the bar without going to law school. But it is interesting that those 4 states do allow you to do that.
Mike Ross has skipped over a ton of work to be an attorney. Take us through the steps that he skipped that we all in real life have to go through.
I loved Mike Ross, and I was pulled for Mike Ross when I was watching the show, but there were many times where I almost got borderline angry at Mike because the process of becoming an attorney is not an easy one, and I think they make that intentional.
Yes.
So the first process is taking the LSAT, and I actually had a tutor for the LSAT. I studied really hard for it, and I had to do that while I was trying to wrap up my undergrad college career, which was not easy. Uh, you take that test, you might take it again to see if you can get a higher score. I only took it one time, but I know a lot of people that took it multiple times. Then you start filling out these law school applications.
Yeah.
Some of them have their own essay. Almost all of them have a very detailed background check where even if you don't have any real issues in your background, you still have to go to the ends of the earth to show it. They You send out all those applications, you get into the school, you accept that, you go to the orientation, then you go through the first year of law school, which to me is the hardest year. I think that's intentional.
Yeah.
I've always heard the term in law school, the first year is to scare you to death, the second year is to work you to death, and the third year is to bore you to death.
Yeah.
I certainly agree with part 1.
Oh, yeah. And they do that to weed out the ones who aren't serious about it, right?
For sure. And it's almost fair on their part. You know, they don't want you to go through 3 years of this just to not end up passing the bar exam or to not end up doing this. They want you to be serious about it. It also looks better for their numbers if all their students pass the bar exam that
Right.
take it. But yeah, that was always a huge worry throughout law school is, am I doing all this? And then I get to the end and I'm not even going to be able to do what I'm training to do.
Yeah, you successfully get to the end of 3 years of law school, and your reward is to study more for the bar exam.
Right. So you go through the first year, which is incredibly difficult. You hear people tell you how hard it's going to be, but it's even harder than that generally. And then all of a sudden, you got pressure on you to find like a summer internship or an
Hmm.
externship, and so you do all of that. And I had a couple really good ones. I interned with the Nashville Predators and did contract drafting for them, and then in my second and third year, I did internships with the Terry Adams law firm in Knoxville, doing family law and all sorts of different things. They were a general practice firm. So I did that alongside. Now you're picking your classes and then towards the end, you're like, well, I want to make sure and take all the classes that are going to be on the bar exam because, you know, that's coming around the corner. So you finally graduate and your family is all there and they're happy for you and everything. And everybody is so happy for you, but you know that like less than a week later, you're going to start studying for the bar exam. And that takes months if you're doing it the right way.
Yeah.
And you take the bar exam, it's all memorization. You know, you basically dedicated the last 2.5 months of your life to passing this exam. Then you try to find a way to kill the next 6 or 7 weeks after that to hear your results. Hopefully you get good results. Then you have to get sworn in and you've got to show all of this stuff to the state bar examiners. I even forgot back, at some point during law school, you have to take the MPRE, which is the ethical test, and you have to pass it.
Right. It's
Uh,
like the bar exam for ethics.
right, and that's something that people skip over, but that's something that you can fail as well. There's all sorts of checkpoints. Becoming a lawyer, there's a lot involved to it, but they want people that really want to be doing this, that are really passionate about it, to be the attorneys. So that's kind of the process to becoming an attorney, all of which Mike got to skip. And I like Mike, but I'm a little resentful.
So Mike Ross is practicing law now, and that's a good segue into the next show we're going to talk about, which is The New Matlock with Kathy Bates. She was a successful practicing attorney in California, and the show starts with her moving to New York City to practice in a law firm that she blames for the death of her daughter through opioids. And so that opens up a whole new can of worms about what a licensed attorney in California has to do in order to practice law in New York City, and how she skipped over those steps too. So Kathy Bates, her daughter dies through opioid addiction, and she wants to get back at the attorneys who kept those drugs on the streets. And in order to do that, she infiltrates the law firm where these attorneys are located, and she wants to find out who specifically worked behind the scenes to cause the death of her daughter indirectly. And so she assumes an identity. Her name is not Madeline Matlock. And she assumes this whole persona of a licensed New York City attorney. And so that brings up the question of what can a licensed attorney do in order to practice in another state?
So I've actually been through this process before. Shortly after I became licensed in Tennessee and starting in Madhorn Law, as many of you know or will know now, we also, in addition to practicing in Tennessee, we practice in Kentucky as well. And so it was important that I become licensed in Kentucky. Well, had I been practicing uh, in Tennessee for 5 years, which I had not at the time. I obviously I certainly have now, but at the time I had not been. Had I been, I could have filled out an application. They could have evaluated me, and I could have simply waived into the state by giving them some information and getting sworn in. Instead, since I had not been practicing for 5 years, I had to take the Kentucky bar exam, which was humbling.
You were dying to take another bar exam after the first one.
Now, fortunately, I did well enough on the multiple choice, and which is a national test. It's not Tennessee specific, that I did not have to take that part again. But the essays were specific to Kentucky, so I had to take that part. And so I went through the whole process again of background checks, submitting applications, things of that nature, and studying again. The the bar exam is a lot about cramming information into your head, so it was certainly not a situation where, "Oh, I took this a year ago. I'll be able to pass with flying colors." You gotta study all over again, and it certainly helped that I'd taken it before, but, um, in many, many states, New York included, if you've been practicing for a certain amount of time, you can waive into that state and get licensed with potentially not having to take another bar exam. And had Matlock actually been her name, she could have done that pretty easily.
She could have. Here, the problem is that she's assuming a different identity. And so, I'll talk a little bit about my experience. You had to take the Kentucky bar. I have waived into a few states myself without having to take an additional bar exam. I took North Carolina and Tennessee, but then I've waived into Georgia and Kentucky. When you waive in to a state through reciprocity and you have enough years of experience, you still have to go through a very thorough application. And they ask you for the names of 5 people who know you, the names of some former clients of yours, the names of 3 attorneys who know you and will vouch for you. And so they're looking into probably a dozen people who will vouch for you and put their credibility on the line, saying that you are who you say you are and you're a good person and a good attorney. That's in addition to criminal background checks, driving record, a credit history, all of these different things that you have to submit. And so in order for Madeline Matlock to waive into New York from California, her background would have to be so elaborately contrived. She'd have to create a credit history for Madeline, a criminal history for Madeline. She would have to come up with a dozen people who would vouch for her, and they also have to have a credible existence. There is a lot to go through for her to get a bar license in New York.
So here's a different situation than Mike Ross. With Mike Ross, we're trying to make an attorney out of someone who is not.
Right.
In this situation, Madeline Matlock is actually Madeline Kingston. And if Madeline Kingston wanted to become an attorney in New York based on her laundry list of accomplishments, that would not have been very difficult. I mean, she would have had to go through that process.
Yeah. No, she would get in easily.
Correct. The problem is that Madeline Matlock doesn't exist. And so that's where we have issues, but the whole point of the show is her trying to hide her identity. Now, was Matlock a good choice for a last name that isn't going to raise eyebrows? I would say no, but then NBC wouldn't have been able to call the show Matlock, and anyway.
Well, she chooses that name because it endears her to people, and her skill set is that she's a master manipulator. And so having the name Matlock immediately gets people thinking, "Oh, that's funny. You're an attorney named Matlock." And it's part of her shtick as she works as an attorney.
It does make for an interesting plot point.
So Madeline's situation raises a lot of questions about the ethics of what she's doing. So when you're an attorney, you are subject to the ethical rules of the state in which you practice. In Tennessee, William and I and Matt practice under the rules of professional conduct of Tennessee. And I'm sure there's something similar in New York. And one of the basic rules that you have to follow is to practice under a true identity. In Tennessee, practicing under a false identity is prohibited under Rule 8.4C of the Tennessee Rules of Professional Conduct. If you practice under a false identity, it's professional misconduct. And so she's putting everything on the line here to try to get what she wants out of this by infiltrating this law firm. I mean, she is in her 70s, and if they take her law license, she can retire. But she would still be subject to other punishments.
So interestingly enough, I think both of us agree that neither one of these heists or farces that is really possible given all the checkpoints and background checks and all of that. It could be argued that no significant harm really happened here. I mean, Mike practiced under Harvey and Jessica and was, by all accounts under the show, very qualified and did a lot of really good work for people. And he had two attorneys above him that were very accomplished. In fact, sometimes when people are waiting on their bar results, they get admitted to practice temporarily under the care of a qualified attorney. Now, of course, that needs to be vetted and analyzed by the Bar Association, but that's what's happening here. And in Matlock's situation, they're actually getting a very accomplished attorney who does really good work. It's just that she's practicing under a different name. So in these two rare instances, I'm not sure that the world was any worse off for this happening. But in practicality, there's a really good reason why all these checkpoints exist, because there's a lot of danger for people to undergo bad representation if people don't take the proper channels.
Yeah, it only takes one mistake in one case for one client to suffer the consequences of a Mike Ross or a Madeline Matlock. So the stakes are high, and that's why you have these licensing authorities in every state enforcing the rules to make sure attorneys that serve clients are real and are vetted and everything. So, William, which one of these characters do you think is in the more realistic situation?
That's a tough question. I originally thought that it was Madeline Matlock when we were preparing for this, because she is an attorney and she does have this established career, and you kind of get over the threshold of could she actually do the job. It's really just about could she pull off this background stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
however, within the firm where they work, Mike Ross has both Harvey, who's directly ahead of him, and Jessica Pearson, who's one of the named partners, working with him to kind of cover this up. So in regards to the rest of the firm, in regards to the outside world, he has people who have control and power trying to push this facade with him. Whereas Madeline Kingston, aka Madeline Matlock, is within her firm doing this all on her own. She doesn't have anyone helping her. So I hate to do this, but I'm going to call it a tie because Mike's situation is so unrealistic because he's not an attorney at all. And there's more hurdles to jump through, but he also has more help.
Hmm. I see your point that he has more help than Madeline, but she has so skillfully navigated season 1. Her story is still being told. I'm gonna stick with Madeline Matlock and see how she pulls it off.
And she does have her husband and her grandson behind the scenes kind of pulling the strings.
Right.
I just think it'd be really difficult. Not only could she be caught by others, or people, attorneys who are going against her that are upset because she beats them, or clients, but she could also be caught by her own firm. That was kind of the reason why it swung back and forth for me. But it's a difficult question. Eh, I guess if I had to say, I would agree with you, simply because the the fact that she was an accomplished attorney and she is an attorney puts her at such an advantage over Mike. If I had to guess, but I think it's really close.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point to wrap it up. We've discussed how difficult it would be to practice law with no license, like Mike Ross did, and how difficult it would be to practice law in another state under a false identity, like Madeline Matlock is doing in her series now. Let's move on to irrelevant evidence.
So, in looking at these two legal shows, it had us thinking, you know, we have watched a lot of other legal shows over the years, some about what we do, some about totally different areas, but it is a topic that enthralls the nations at times. And another thing that people like to do is draft. It's football season. We have fantasy football drafts. So what we're gonna do is a fantasy draft of our favorite TV attorneys.
Yes.
So
All right.
I am going to be a gentleman. I'm going to let you go first.
Okay. All right. So I just watched A Few Good Men for the millionth time, and I'm proud to say that it still holds up really well. Tom Cruise, in his character in that movie, thinks on his feet as one of the best attorneys I've ever seen. So he's leading my team. So that's my first pick.
Okay. So I wasn't being that much of a gentleman and letting you go first, because I know from fantasy football drafts that sometimes if you don't have the number one that you want, you can kind of stack picks later on. So we're going to do a snake draft. I get 2 here and you get 2. And we go back and forth. So here we go. Here's who I would have taken 1-1, even if you hadn't have taken noted action actor Tom Cruise, who I don't think of as an attorney.
Have you even seen A Few Good Men?
So I'm gonna take Marshall Erickson from How I Met Your Mother. My wife and I have seen this series all the way through probably 7 times. He reminds me of myself a lot. He's got all these kind of weird out there skills. He's good at games. He's a diehard Minnesota Vikings fan. I'm not a Vikings fan, but I'm a diehard
That's
sports.
necessary to be a good attorney.
But he lives a very, he does a lot of other things other than being a lawyer. But when it's time to be a lawyer, he's very, very passionate about that, and he cares about what he's doing. He is close with his family, and he loves his friends. He's just a great guy. I mean, it's Jason Segel. He's great in everything. And granted, I get that kind of goes against my point of him not being known for being an attorney, whatever. But Marshall Erickson, awesome guy. He's my 1-1. My second pick is going to be, it's actually one guy with 2 names. Jimmy McGill, better known as Saul Goodman from Better Call Saul. It's played by Bob.
That's a choice I can respect.
Yeah, he's played by Bob Odenkirk, who is a diehard Cubs fan. So that's big points for me. But he's a great actor, and he is a good attorney, I would say. But he takes a lot of shortcuts, but his creativity and his desire to win, and it's just, he's always pulling off these fun stunts. And it's just incredibly fun to watch. And do I always agree with Saul Absolutely not. And what I certainly wouldn't. He is not an ethical stalwart by any means.
Yeah, I don't know if he can win legally.
He comes up with some creative arguments. There's one time in particular that stands out to me. He got someone on the stand to say that he was passionate that the person sitting in that chair committed this crime. And he had actually switched out the defendant and put the person who actually did it out in the crowd, which cast doubt as to the reliability of the witness's statement. And it's just such a creative thing. He's the people's lawyer, Saul Goodman.
Okay.
Better Call Saul.
Well, I hate to burst your bubble here, but Saul actually stole that move from the original Andy Griffith Matlock from the 80s and 90s. So that's why I'm picking the OG Andy Griffith Matlock on my team, because he came up with the switcheroo that Saul Goodman also tried.
Nobody got anywhere by talking bad about Andy Griffith, so I'm not going to do that.
I get one more right now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go with the new Matlock, Kathy Bates, because being an attorney, having skills of manipulation can come in very, very handy at different times. So I'll add her to my team.
Kathy Bates is Waterboy's mama. You say what you want. That's who she is. She's actually done a lot of. She's in The Office. She's plays a lot of really famous roles, but not who I would have picked. But you do you. All right, so I have two more.
Okay.
And I like it because you've taken 3 already, but I'm in the lead with just the 2 I've already taken, so I'm in a pretty good spot.
Who says who?
Common sense, logic, all the above. So,
Comment, let us know.
I'm going to go out on a limb here because I want to let you fight back in case someone has a problem with this. But we've talked today about lawyers who aren't really technically the lawyers that they say they are. Well, the very well-known Olivia Pope from Scandal is not actually an attorney, but she's a professional fixer. And she does a lot of, I mean, she's the president's right-hand person. And at times she's even more powerful than the president. That show is a roller coaster ride all the way through. And she is a jack of all trades, Jackie of all trades. I don't know. A Jacqueline of all trades. And I want her on my team. I know she's not an attorney. Maybe she's overqualified paralegal. I don't know, but I want her on my team. So I'm going to take her. And I know it's controversial, but again, I'm in the lead, so I can take risks.
Okay.
And I get another one here.
Well, let me just sum this up for our viewers here. You've chosen a sitcom lawyer, a lawyer who ends up in prison, and a non-lawyer for your dream team. So just so everyone knows where we are, go ahead with your last pick.
For the 4th, it's Harvey Specter. I know that we talked about Suits ad nauseum today, but it's Harvey Specter. I believe everything he says. In the pilot episode, he's trying to close a deal, and he convinces someone that the red herring is this sheet of paper that shows that he did something or another wrong.
The wire transfer.
The wire transfer. And it causes the guy to go in there and close the deal. And Jessica Pearson, who should know him better than anybody, goes, "How did you get that?" And he shows the piece of paper, and it's nothing related to this at all. It's just a judgment call that he made. They show him playing poker constantly. He's an incredible poker player because he makes all these calls that are correct. Under pressure, he gets it right so often. He is the idea of your crazy, successful New York attorney, and he makes for an incredible character, and he is cool as a cucumber. He is my closer. That's why I picked him last. He's the best closer. He is Harvey Specter, and he is probably the reason that if anybody out there didn't think I was leading, is now believes that I won this drought.
I respect your choice of Harvey as the second best closer. The best closer is Alan Shore from Boston Legal, and he's my last pick because he's a great closer.
Boring.
Boring to 12-year-olds. Not boring to those of us who watched every episode of Boston Legal on Sunday nights after the practice.
Can you hear the snoring? And my fantasy football team is 2-0. My fantasy lawyer league draft is at least 1-0. I don't know if you can win this by more than one, but what I can say is that it's been a fun discussion today, talking about two shows that we really like, but also going down memory lane. of everything that we did to get to where we are so that we could help you guys out there with your legal needs, whether that be a car wreck or a premises liability case or a will or disability or any of the areas that we do. We worked really hard to get to this point, and we really appreciate the opportunity to help all of you with any legal issues that you have. So
Yes.
if you do, don't call Harvey, don't call Olivia. She's not even a licensed attorney, so that wouldn't be good. Call the attorneys at Matt Hardin Law, and we'll be happy to help you.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Pop Culture Courtroom. I'm Michael Kilgore.
And I'm William Mayfield. And we'll see you next time on the Pop Culture Courtroom. The Pop Culture Courtroom is a Matt Hardin Law production.
If you're a loved one that's been injured in a car wreck or other personal injury incident, call the law firm, the Tennesseans Trust.
Visit matthardinlaw.com or call 615-200-1111 for your free consultation today.